which is that this system that was designed to harm black people was also designed to help white people. White people benefit from mass homeownership and easy access to credit, higher education, and a criminal justice system that protects rather than harms them on average. And the reason we don't often think of it this way is that white people are taught not to think of ourselves as even having a race. Oh, everyone else has a race, but not us. We are the regulars, the default. But it's bullshit. The system of racial hierarchy we live under does assign us a race. It just gives us a benefit for having that race. And what we as white people almost never do is confront those benefits. Ask, what are they and how do we feel about them? And
racism often gives advantages to white folks.
And it's part of the conversation we almost never have. I mean, even white Americans who are sympathetic to the issue of racism are aware of it, say, oh my God, that's so terrible, how black people are treated, they read the right books, they watch the right movies. Michael Keaton knocks down the sign off the wall, or was it Kevin Costner? Who was it in Hidden Figures? He knocks off the bathroom sign. Do you remember this?
Right, it's Kevin Costner. Right,
it's Kevin Costner.
Sign. It's a great moment, right?
He pulls down the sign. Oh, he fixed racism forever. Oh my God, I found out racism exists. Let me fix that for you. Bang, knock the sign down. We did it. Hooray! That's so many white people's experience of what racism is in America. But even folks who are maximally thoughtful about it almost never think about race in relation to themselves as white people. And in fact, a lot of white people have a revulsion or a resistance to thinking of race as even something that they possess or a label that would be applied to them. So have you felt that resistance throughout your life, and where do you think it comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely certainly, I don't come from a lot of money and I went to a private university. So I feel like particularly in college, right, I would be like, but what did I get for being white, right? Particularly because the way we'd talk about racial privilege would be about the experience of very affluent white people, right?
Yes.
And so I would sort of be like, what did I ever get for being white, right? Like, that's crazy. And then, you get some more experience in the world and you understand like, oh, it works really differently for people who aren't white. And for me, like the project of doing the sort of studying of the white bonus was kind of like, well, if we even take away these sort of soft privilege things that we talk about and instead just focus on like dollars and cents, maybe I'll learn something that's helpful.
Yeah. So what is the concept of the white bonus? Is the title of the book. What do you mean by that?
Right. So the white bonus is the amount of money that you've gotten because of racism when you're a white person, right?
Oh, I get the check every year. It's awesome.
Yeah, I know we all get a direct check, right? No.
No, I mean, yeah. Well, I have not received such a check. So what do you mean by that bonus?
Right. So the way that I measure it in the book is I say, okay, well, how much money did I or the people that I was profiling in the book, how much have we gotten from our families since we left home? And how likely is it that our families would have had that money to give us if they weren't white, right? So that just means going back through each family's history and the events in the person's life and saying, okay, like, just how likely is it, right? Like, I'm not proving this at the level of social science. I'm not sort of proving it in a courtroom, but just sort of going, all right, well, for me, for example, when my grandfather passed away, I inherited $25,000. That was really helpful for me at the time. Now, this is not the kind of money, right, that a lot of my classmates at the private university are getting from their families, right? It's much smaller. But for me, it was significant. And, then go, okay, well, how did my grandfather have that money, right? Well, he worked as a banker in mid-century America, right? At a time when, when he went into banking in 1930, in the entire country, there were only 80 Black bankers, right? And so pretty much, right, he had that job because he was white in part. And then also, right, he bought a house in the 30s that had a racial covenant on it. So if he had been a Black person, he would not have legally been allowed to live in that home and to build the wealth that he had right through that house. So I think, when I started looking at my white bonus, it was like, well, like, it's pretty clear, like any money from that grandfather, right, that's tied to his being white. And I didn't do anything to make that the case, right? But I'm still benefiting from it.
Yeah. I also think sometimes, even if you haven't received a check like that, there's a more invisible form of getting that money. I mean, I never in my 20s, after I graduated college, received a check from my parents for any reason other than a birthday gift. And, sometimes the birthday gifts are, not insignificant, but, whatever. So I guess I did receive money. Never mind. I take it back. I guess I did get some checks because they were birthday gifts. What am I talking about? Why would I have left that out? That's what it's so strange the way we think about money. Okay, but apart from the birthday gifts, right? Let's just pretend I never got those. I remember realizing, well, hold on a second. I went to college. I have no debt, right? My parents are able to provide that for me. And also, I know that if something were to go wrong, I would have my folks to fall back on. Early in my 20s, I decided I was going to quit my job as a web developer and do comedy full time. And I was luckily able to make a living doing that, doing freelance jobs, video editing, stuff like that, while I did the comedy until I could finally make a living at it. But why did I feel okay to take that risk? It was because, well, if things go really bad, my parents will help me out. I can go visit them on Long Island and stay in their bedroom or whatever it was, right? And I had friends who, in comedy, who genuinely didn't have that cushion. I had people around me who came from immigrant families who didn't have that sort of resources, for instance. And then the college itself, or why were my parents able to send me to college? Well, they were both college professors themselves, or had PhD degrees and were educators. Why did they have that? It's because my mom's dad was a World War II veteran, bought a home on the GI Bill, and benefited from the huge, influx of cash and support given to that generation, right? He lived in Michigan, Upper Michigan at the time. Plenty of people lived in Michigan, I think, who did not get that help from the federal government, buying a home, et cetera, et cetera. So regardless of the check, there's this whole basis of stability that came from multi-generations of middle-class stability granted to my family by specific policy decisions on the part of, state, local governments, federal government, that not everybody had access to.
That's correct. I mean, so the GI Bill and the New Deal are really strong examples of how advantaged white folks has been baked into American policy and sort of social, social equity, right? Mm-hmm. And so with the GI Bill, most of the education benefits were used by white folks. The way that they administered that program, right? You could sort of make the decisions about the GI Bill at the state level, right? So most Black people at the time in the U.S. lived in the South. And so the local administrators in the South, right, could decide you do or you don't get that. Same thing with the housing.
And this was in the mid-50s that they were making these decisions.
Right. And the same thing with housing, right, and sort of the mortgage guarantees as well, like under the GI Bill, right? And so you both had that, as well as most of the institutions of higher education in the South were still segregated, right? Yeah. And so you didn't have sufficient capacity to educate all the folks that wanted to get educated, right? Yeah. And so that's a huge thing that I think disappears for a lot of white folks, right? Because it's, your grandpa or your great grandpa. But it really has a different effect depending on your race.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is intergenerational wealth, is it not? I mean, we often think of wealth as being what Bill Gates has or Elon Musk has, but we're talking about resources that families are able to grow and pass down over time that were, to some extent, given to them by policy choices, right? Absolutely.
I mean, middle class stability is something that government created. And when government created it, they essentially restricted it to white people.
I had no idea that, the GI Bill, such a famous bill that granted middle class security, was, so segregationist-y. That's not a word. You know what I mean? was discriminatory in that way. I mean, what other policies, created this?
Right. So in addition to the GI Bill and FHA, right, you had just general housing discrimination, right? So we had racial covenants sort of declared unconstitutional in 1948, but discriminating against people on the basis of race for housing didn't become illegal until the Housing Rights Act in 1968, right? So you have all that time before you could actually, like, as a Black person, go in and be like, no, you can't actually tell me I can't live here because of my race, right? So all those generations, all those decades of building wealth and stability, right, get left out. And so that's really important. Higher education, right? Also hugely important, particularly because you had so much segregation in it early on when it was affordable. So I think this is something really important. and Heather McGhee touches on it somewhat in her book, Some of Us. But, with the GI Bill, most of the people getting to go to college, it was covered, right? It was just free.
Yeah.
You could just go to college because you had the GI Bill. When you get to the boomer generation going through college, then it's a little more expensive. Like you might need a part-time job over the summer to cover some of the tuition, right? But the states are still chipping in a lot of money for it, right? And at the time, right, only a few more people of color are at university, right? So GI Bill, it's almost only white people outside of HBCUs, right, that are in universities. Then you have the boomer generation, the little bit less white, still pretty affordable. You get to my generation, Gen X. Now you kind of got to work full time during the summer and half time during the school year to get through. But you'll probably have some debt when you get out, right? And so that's as like the amount of people of color coming into the educational population, right, is increasing. And now, right, as we're getting a more and more integrated higher education population, right, you don't get out of college, right, without mortgaging your future unless your family can pay for it. Right?
I was lucky that I had no debt. I consider that to be like a great gift that I had. Whereas 70 years ago, everyone going to college was like, yeah, who has debt? I mean, like we all went for free, right? Or at least the vast majority did. I never even thought until you pointed this out of combining these two trends. That, in the 50s, higher education was whites only. Like, if black people were going to the college, it was either a special institution that was founded specifically for that purpose, of which there were only a handful, or they were escorted by the National fucking Guard, right? In order to cross the gates of that university. To now, we have a much better, admissions is far more race blind than it used to be, and people of all races go to colleges to not a perfect extent, but obviously it happens now. It didn't before. To combine that trend with the trend that, hey, 70 years ago or so, university was free, and now you have to pay hundreds of thousands. You put yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to go. Holy shit! As college became more inclusive, it also became more expensive simultaneously, such that basically just white people of our grandparents' generations went for free. Now black people couldn't go. Now that black people can go, it's super expensive to go. I never thought of those two trend lines are going in opposite directions at the exact same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's really interesting political research about this too, right? So in the 1950s, and I have not memorized these statistics, but in the 1950s, the majority of white voters supported the idea that government was supposed to help and that everybody would need help sometime, and sort of a broad support for things like the New Deal, where government was seen as an agent to help you, and you would pay taxes and you would get something back for it, right? As soon as our sort of body politic and people in higher education, as soon as that began to be integrated, white support for this idea of a collective sort of government response plummeted.
Yeah.
Right. It just went way down. And then you see the rise of Reagan and Nixon and, that all the stuff that sort of sets up where we are today.
I mean, we covered this on my show, The G Word. It's one of the most important facts about the 20th century that as soon as government help, government assistance of any kind started being given to more than just white people started going, it's wasteful. We got to stop giving it out. Look at these bad people getting the government money. And then, the New Deal age of governments helping people buy homes, go to college, all the sort of supports that our grandparents had and that we don't have started being taken away, specifically because suddenly they were going to black. I mean, the most obvious example of this is, I've brought up on the show before, what happened at public pool.
Hi, family, tribe, welcome back. Systemic racism in the US, of course, has a historic, and I'm going to read something that I came across, so that this is not my own making. This is us having this kind of a discussion, and then if it is really happening or if it's not. Now, of course, if it's your first time, you bumped across this particular channel accidentally, how about you leave me a tiny little comments on the comment section? That will make me feel good. And above all, it will show me that we are trying to align up as a tribe. Yes, as a family, that is. Now, about systemic racism, and especially in the US, of course, has these particular historical disadvantages, historically disadvantaged the blacks, and while the white people are benefiting. Now, especially in areas like housing, education, credit access, and of course, the criminal justice systems. So there are those particular disparities in these particular domains. Policies like redlining, and the GI Bill, which helped the white families build wealth while excluding black families. Now, the war on drugs and mass incarceration disproportionately harmed more black communities, while white people were more likely to receive leniency. Now, these advantages, of course, often go unnoticed because whiteness is treated as the societal default. In quotes, making privilege seem invisible. Now, this racial inequality persists today, reinforcing economic and social disparities. Now, if up to that particular very end there is some sense or some truthness in the statement that's just made, do drop me your comments on the comment section. Let me know exactly, especially the Africans in the diaspora. Yes, family, let me know of what you think. Has these, happened to you? Have you come across somebody who has excruciated the same? And what does it mean for the people of color? Let's meet in the next upload. Cheers, guys.